Let me give you a quick walk through the book, The Guide for the Perplexed. So the book is divided into three big sections. In fact, these sections are themselves identified as books, and the entire document as a treatise, as they used to call them in the ancient times. So it is subdivided into three big chunks, with each section handling a specific or specific issues that are related. Now, the first section of the book handles mostly the homonymous and figurative language used in the Bible. I've told you that throughout the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides is trying to persuade or to enlighten or to teach us that how the Bible is written, the Old Testament in particular, is not literal. Mostly it's figurative, and most people make the mistake of reading it as literal, and that can mislead. According to him, it can mislead some people to have ideas that are not really what the writers of the Bible meant it to be. But also, it's also the way he explains it is that this language is used for two reasons. Reason number one is he has not used this word in the book to dump down the content of religious knowledge for the public. But it is done in such a way that the enlightened, the people who are of higher intellectual capacity, can still get the information, and they will have a deeper understanding of reality and God and the environment and the universe. So it is meant to be read into a two level, a level that is accessible to the general public, and a level that is accessible to people who are highly intellectual, or people who are trained, especially in metaphysics. So that's section one of the book, is majorly about that, the use of figurative language in the Bible, and it also explains the reasons why that is. And I've told you that it's for those who are enlightened to get the information that is meant for them, and also for the general public to have some understanding about the reality that we live in as humans, and the environment. The first section also, in the first section also, that was the previous, Maimonides explains why, and I'm picking the things that stand out. Of course, we are going to go into I will have specific videos handling specific niche topics, even from all these three sections. He also tells us as to why God should be described in the negatives and not in the positives. This was a huge thing for me as I was researching about Maimonides, and in particular his book, The Guide for the Perplexed. I came across this being mentioned in several websites and places, that Maimonides has this idea of, or expresses, or trains about this idea of describing God in the negatives. And it didn't make sense to me, but when I started reading the book and I go through that section, it made sense why he thought it's a good idea to describe God in the negatives and not in the positives. And I'm going to have a video on this, and you should watch that video. You'll be so surprised, that it's mostly going to make sense to you why he decided so. Because let me just give you something small. When we describe God in the positives, we are likely to be imaginative, and we are likely to go away from science. When we describe God in the negatives, we are likely not to go far away from science. We are likely to remain in the logical world. Yeah, so I'm going to explain that. That first section also, he talks about, he explains his differences with the Islamic teachings, especially those by a group of intellectuals called the Mutakallimīn. So the Mutakallimīn had their way of describing nature and the world and the universe in a logical way. I have to emphasize that. And he tells us what the Mutakallimīn describe and why he thinks they are wrong. But with the understanding we have now, it's very clear that some of those things he was wrong and they were right. I will give you an example. He talks about the Mutakallimīn, explaining that everything you see is built from the simplest building block or the smallest building block, that is an atom. Maimonides had an issue with that. He thought they were wrong on that. But now, after many years with modern science and whatever, that's almost everybody agrees that things are built from atoms, although now there is even deeper. The science is moving further and we are realizing that there are smaller things than atoms, but that's besides the point. Yeah, so in that section, and that's not the only thing, and there are other things that he turns out that he was right and they were wrong. And the other things that they both, him and his school of thought and the Mutakallimīn, both were wrong. And I have to say this, that as I was going through and trying to do other research, I realized this Mutakallimīn was not only the people who held the view of that school of thought were not only Muslim. They were mostly Muslim, but there were even Jews who had, and Christians. So another thing I need to mention, and I'm going to talk about this later, is that I realized that Maimonides, and he brings out something that is likely was the norm in his time, and it was the respect that you will have for opinions that you opposed or you thought were wrong. Like, he still had this respect for the people he did not agree with. He did not agree with Mutakallimīn. He did not agree with Aristotle and Plato and all these other people. But even when he did not agree with them, and he even says it himself that before you disagree with someone, you need to embrace their opinion and try to understand it from their perspective, so that when you disagree with them, you've really understood it from their perspective. You don't just start opposing it before you do that. So I found that to be very interesting. Yeah, so that's the first section. There's a lot, and we are going to have videos handling specific area. Now, section 2 of the book, he goes now, he tries to look at what the philosophers, in particular Aristotle and Plato, mostly Aristotle, what he says about the existence of the universe. And in particular, he was trying, or he attempted to contrast what Aristotle believed, or not really believed, but worked very hard to prove through logical arguments about whether the universe was eternal or the universe was created. Of course, Aristotle had come to the conclusion that the universe was eternal. He also talks about Aristotle and other philosophers trying to prove the existence of God or non-existence of God. Aristotle doesn't call it God, he calls it the first cause, and he gives these logical arguments that makes you be like, okay, maybe there was a first cause, and because it makes you try to think, like we have now this general belief or knowledge that the universe came out of the Big Bang. But when you read, and Maimonides tries to explain these logical arguments, and you think, okay, there was a Big Bang. What triggered that? And you think about those. So that second section talks about those ideas, and also Maimonides attempts to discredit the opinion that the universe was eternal. For him, the universe was created. That's what he tries to prove through his own logical arguments, that the universe is created. He also goes into talking about the theory of intelligences. I found this to be so interesting, because I remember there was a time I was having this conversation with someone, and we were talking about artificial intelligence, and I was like, looks like maybe we think that artificial intelligence is something new. Maybe we shouldn't even be calling it artificial. Maybe it's intelligence. And this is why I was saying that. I was saying, like, maybe for millions of years or for eternity, intelligence has had this thing of reinventing itself. So we humans are just helping intelligence to reinvent itself. Maybe in 1,000 years, artificial intelligence will be, of course, intelligence that will be doing things and more things than what the humans do. And especially right now with this chat GPT thing that is going, everybody's talking about. And I was telling him maybe intelligence has always done that. And I think if Maimonides was alive today, he would have found it so easy to prove some of his concepts. And not only Maimonides, even Aristotle with his theory of the intelligences. Because now we are in a situation where we can easily see, or it is easy to explain to people that intelligence can exist outside of humans. Which was very hard to explain 1,000 or about 1,000 years ago. So there is that talk of the theory of intelligence. And there are things like the concept of time. Some things you never think about, like a question is thrown to you, is time something that is real? Of course, Aristotle and even Maimonides agree that time is a product of, is an accident. That's how they describe it, it's an accident of motion, which I was thinking about, like, yeah, it is true. Time is an accident of motion, because without the motion that is happening in the everywhere, then there is no time. How would you say there is time if the world is not revolving and rotating and everything is standstill? Then there is no time. So there is that talk of time. In the second section, he also talks about prophecy. Now, when you hear prophecy, especially if you are not a religious person, you will be like, that's nonsense talk, basically. But when you start reading, you realize, no, it's not nonsense talk. There is a very intellectual approach to this topic of prophecy. And Herodotus again, sorry. I'm still in the hangover of the previous video. Maimonides talks about, he explains how someone becomes a prophet. And to him, he scoffs at the idea that anybody can become a prophet. Somebody wakes up in the morning and they are a prophet. He says that's not possible at all. Because he says to be a prophet is someone who's just a little bit or higher than a philosopher. And they have everything that a philosopher has, except they have something additional, more, such that they are able to, they understand metaphysics and they have this understanding of science and things, and they have all this knowledge, but then they have something extra that makes, through that knowledge, they are able to see things that other people, not even philosophers, can see. So that's what, and he explains in detail how someone becomes a prophet. And he says that how the prophets we read were prophets. They were not just prophets that most people think they were prophets who somebody woke up in the morning and they are a prophet. Now, section 3 of the book, he talks about it's something that I found very hard to understand, and it's a vision by Ezekiel, prophet Ezekiel, and he says that's a very important. It's about this vision of some weird animals pulling some cart or something, and he explains it. Now, here's something I need to say. This does not only occur in that section, but in the various sections of the other sections of the book. He talks about knowledge that is hidden. Apparently there was knowledge that was always hidden. In the Jewish community, this knowledge was not written down. Some of it was, and then it was kept secret, and only a few people could be exposed to this knowledge. And even when it was written down, I've already mentioned that that's where the use of figurative language comes in, such that people who understood that knowledge will read the figurative descriptions and they will understand it, and the general public will not get it. And it tells us about some of this knowledge not being written down, and it was passed through word of mouth to only very few people who were chosen because they qualified. And to qualify, you need to be somebody of a particular character. So the other people will not be given this knowledge. And he says some of that knowledge was lost because of that. He himself tells us that there is knowledge he knew that he could not share because it was not acceptable for him to share. And it's like there was also knowledge that he knew it existed, but he didn't know of that knowledge because he didn't qualify to know that knowledge. So there is this idea that comes out of the book that there has always been knowledge that is kept for a few people who qualify to get that knowledge, and the general public remains ignorant. And he gives this analogy of this knowledge is like there is a night, it's dark everywhere, and some people live throughout their life in that darkness. They never see anything. They born, live, die, never seen anything. And then there are a few who see glimpses of light, like describe it like the lightning at night. You see something and then you don't see again. And then there are those who see. So there is that talk. And then in the third section, it talks about evil. And this was also very interesting, the way he talks about evil, the capacity to do evil. And I was reading that section. I remember again, Jordan Peterson, I've told you in another video that I'm a huge fan of his. And I remember there was a time he was saying this, that before you call yourself a good person, you need to look deep inside you and see that evil that is there and recognize it and know how deep it is. When you have that understanding of the evil inside you, then you can come out and call yourself a good person. Before you recognize the evil that is deep down in you, you don't call yourself a good person. That's what he said. Now, I was reading this part and he was explaining the concept of evil, and this is so interesting. I will create a video about this. And he says there are three sources of evil that comes to us. There's evil from nature, there is evil from other people, and there is evil from ourselves. And he explains it so well that the evil from nature is very rare. The evil from other people, despite what we think, we always think that people do us a lot of harm. That evil is still very small. The maybe 70-80% of evil that happened to us comes from ourselves. I'm going to create a video, and maybe it sounds like no, it can't be like. But even when I read the first part of it, I was like, but now going down, like, yeah, that's very true. It made sense. Like, yeah, the majority of bad things that happen to us are because of us and not other people or nature. So there's that part of evil. Section 3, there's a part of providence. Providence, like, because you will have a lot of problems, especially if you believe in God, about providence. Why some things happen to other people and some things happen to other people or not happen to other people. There's a section on omniscience, and then there is also a section on the Jewish law. And as a young person, I used to attend a church that focused so much on the 10 Commandments. And it was very important, And then there were the question of the law of Moses, as it's called, used to come up a lot. And of course, when you have conversation, even people who are of different Christian beliefs, some people will say, oh, that law was abolished at the cross. Others will say, sometimes it becomes which one do we choose, which one we don't, or which one we choose to follow, which one we don't follow. Of course, there are 10 commandments, then there are others, I think like 600 or so laws of different food, dress, all these. And this is the first book I read that made me see those laws in context. And something else came to mind, and he even said, and at some point I was like, it's like the United States, for example, has a constitution, has laws on everything, marriage, everything, property, everything. And then one time it happens, the United States, poof, disappears, or the people there are pushed out and they spread around the world. But they still feel they are Americans, and they still remember the laws, but now they go live in other countries with their own laws. Now they still want to keep their laws, but then sometimes what is lost, or what they don't understand, is that those laws were working because those were the primary laws of the state. But without the state, now some of those laws become irrelevant. And we'll do have a video on that. So those are the three major sections of the book. And believe you me, this is a huge book. Don't think those are the only meaningful things that are in there. So we'll have videos going forward. So if it's the first time you're watching me, please subscribe, and then you will have the opportunity to see the other videos I'm going to upload.